again. Today we're going to talk about how to get over anger and hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go through a few things. We're going to learn how and where anger comes from and how to process it. And stay to the very end because we're going to actually do an exercise to help you process through some of your anger.
One of the most important things that we want to do as we talk about emotions is, first of all, just to honor your feelings. And I think anger is one of those things that so often, especially as a child, we're just told, don't feel angry, don't get mad, don't do this, don't get that. And I think it's confusing, especially because there are things that are wrong that happen in the world. There are injustices.
Yes.
And so when there is injustice, I think it is natural and sometimes right to feel angry. As we talked about in the previous video, that is what has motivated a lot of change in history, when there has been an injustice and it angered people enough that they moved into action. So I would say the first step, really, as you're trying to sort through your emotion and anger, is to say, I am angry, I recognize that, I feel that, but now let's look, is this anger coming from an injustice, something that truly deserves my anger, or is it coming from my ego? Because we also get mad about things that hit our sore spots and our vulnerable parts of ourselves.
Our wounds.
Yes.
Our wounds. Sometimes that's the natural reaction. We've had our own wound.
Yes.
And we get hit in that wound, and instead of cowering, where it feels helpless, we turn to anger so that we feel like we have some control, like you talked about before, over the situation. So it's time to look at which one of those is true. Where is that anger coming from?
Right. So in allowing yourself to feel and express your anger, first let's talk about when it's coming from an injustice. I remember one time I was very angry about something that had happened in my life where, in many senses of the word, I was a victim of somebody else's choices that were wrong and
an injustice,
malicious in intent, and I had no control over that. And I feel that I had a right to be angry about that. And yet for me to sit and hold that anger over someone else's choices never hurts them.
Right.
That anger only hurts me. It affects me on a physical level, an emotional level, a mental level. And so I had to decide, even though I am justified to feel this anger, I'm going to choose not to hold on to it. And yet it needed expression, and I wanted to do that in a safe way. And so we live right at the base of a mountain, and so I climbed up the hill a little ways and found a pile of rocks, and I threw those rocks down the mountain, and just every rock I chucked, I just sent a piece of my anger with it. I know Mother Earth forgave me for that. She's very loving that way. But that was a safe expression of how I felt. That honored me, and yet that gave me a tool to release it. Of course, there was nobody there. No one got hurt in this.
Well, and one time I could tell that my husband had a lot of anger, and so I grabbed some things that weren't very special, and I drove to a part of town that could handle it, and I made him break some things to express that emotion, because we talked about in the emotion video, it's got to go. It's an energy.
Yes.
It's got to go somewhere. So in throwing the rock, that energy is able to go somewhere.
Yes.
And that's helpful.
Yes.
So otherwise we stuff it down inside.
For sure.
And that's when we get health problems galore.
Yes. And even a simpler way, maybe you don't live by a mountain, but sometimes when I'm in my car and I really need to have a conversation with somebody and stand up for myself. Even though I'm sitting in a car all by myself, I will yell at the top of my lungs what I want to say to them, you know? And again, it's a way to honor me and how I'm feeling, and a safe way to express it and release it, because I certainly don't want to hold on to that. And it's amazing how once you let the energy of that anger and emotion out, now there's space to look at the other possibilities.
Yes.
You know, I was mad at this one person for years, and finally we had one of those conversations in the car, well, me and myself, yelling at him. And the minute I finally got all my anger out, I realized there was another way he could have intended that sentence.
Wow.
And I felt so bad that here for 20 years I had carried that anger when possibly it wasn't even the intention, you know. And so, and yet I would never have seen that had I not released the anger.
So powerful. That's such a powerful expression of that, needing to get it through. For 20 years it was stuck.
I know.
It was stuck for 20 years. We do that. We do that so often. But sometimes it comes from a place that isn't injustice.
Justified.
A lot of times it comes, again, like we talked about before, some kind of a situation comes forward, and in a blink of an eye, we start to compare. Or it hits that ego of so it makes us feel like usually we're not good enough. Or
it hits a wound that we already have.
Yeah. And so in that case, it's a very different scenario. So as we talked about earlier, tell me, if when you're with a client and they have an injustice that they have anger towards, how is it different toward the injustice to go about healing that injustice, anger from injustice?
Yeah, well, I feel like when that anger is justified, really the most helpful thing I can do for my client is help them process that anger, give it a voice, give it an expression, find some way to release it, because that anger came from a source that was not their own and was not their fault and was not their doing. And so at that point, all you can do is help them release that so that in that more healthy state they can start taking steps toward healing. But if somebody comes and is angry over something coming from the ego, then it's a totally different process, because we've got to stop and look at why they needed that thought. Why did you need to feel like you were the best? Why did you need to feel justified in that? Why did you need to feel that you were better than somebody else? You know, and you got angry because you weren't, or you got angry because they said something to make you feel inferior. Well, now let's treat the cause of the thought. Let's go to the mind.
Yeah, so I think it's Deepak says it happens in an almost in an instant, where so the emotion comes in of anger, and then the mind is going to keep playing scenarios to keep that anger going and alive. But we go to the mind again and we question it, just like you did when you put it out there in that anger. Then you could question, oh wait, could that have been meant the other way? And so you begin, that's where logic can come in. And we can question our thoughts. Like, is this justified? Okay, is this anger something that we can even talk about whether we need to process it with the person we're angry with, or if this is something I just need to work at on my own. And that takes a minute of space. But first accepting it is important, and becoming aware of it, and then learning to accept it, then we can decide what needs to happen next.
And I just remembered a funny example. This is a good example. There was one night where we were eating dinner, and I'm very sensitive because I am not a great cook. So let's just put that out there right now, right? And so we're sitting there eating dinner, and it was food that I had picked up somewhere and brought home to my family. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, this food just tastes so good to me tonight. It's just so good. And my husband said, well, that's because you didn't cook it. And you could see all the children, like they all froze and they stopped eating and they're like, Dad! And in that moment I could have gone to my ego and been so mad that he said that. But I knew what he meant because sometimes when you cook stuff, by the time you sit down to eat it, it doesn't taste so good.
It's always better when somebody else cooks it.
And that's what he meant. And so I could laugh and say, you're right, we should eat out more often.
Yeah.
But that could have been a moment, you know, where it went the other way.
Right. And that we do that where it comes in and we're right there. Too fast. But if we, but that's where the thought process probably for you happened quickly. You understood what he meant.
Fortunately.
Yeah.
Or he would have been on the couch that night.
Yeah. And it took a whole different direction.
Yeah.
But you used the logic of it. You probably, it went through, I think my husband really does love me. He doesn't normally say rude things to me. Yeah, he wouldn't say it that way. And so, you're able to bring in some logic, quick as can be, and shift that into a positive experience.
Yeah. My kids still laugh about that moment. They were traumatized.
So now let's take a moment and let's bring forth any feelings you have of anger. And at this point, they can be whether it's justified or unjustified. Just allow that anger to come forward and kind of connect with that. Take a moment to give that anger a voice. And you can say to that anger, I see you, and I know that you are there. And I see that you are calling out for action. You can even imagine that anger holds a shape. And it helps to be able to see it if we give it a shape. And you can give it a color. And you might stop and think for a moment if that shape holds a sound or a frequency. And in that moment of being connected with it, see if it has anything to say, if that frequency has a message for you. And see if that anger wants to be something else, if the intelligence of that anger desires to transform into something else. And let any images present itself. Let your imagination help you here in seeing and honoring that emotion of anger. Allowing that anger to flow through you. Seeing if the energy of that can release from the body. And give honor to that anger. Show compassion to yourself for the need for that anger. And as long as you need to sit with that and allow it to transform. And when you're ready, take a deep breath. Begin to feel the anger release. Release for this moment. We are so grateful to you to take time to recognize the anger that might be within you and know that it is a normal human reaction and an emotion. It's something that we all deal with, and it's the process of working through it that can help propel us forward and to have more compassion for those around us. So thank you for the work that you are doing on yourself and understanding more of who you are and more of your emotions. Go ahead and subscribe at the bottom and check out the Wholeness Network so that you can find tools like this to help you on a daily basis through all the emotions. And we will continue to work on them here. So make sure you ring the bell so you get notified.
Thanks so much for joining us.